Since it's only Greenville Fire Rescue as the EMS provider at football games, does it?
It's not.
It's not though.
So
He just mentioned there are East Care EMTs and paramedics there now.
And nurses.
And there are nurses, and there are Vidant physicians as well. So it's just a different
8
model.
emergency room physicians and residents were at the last game. 8 total.
Okay, to clarify, are there other ambulances from other departments at the? Okay.
Yes, East Care ambulance is there, but they're not there to be an ambulance. You don't need an ambulance when you have a medical facility on site. You only need an ambulance when you need to transport to the hospital. Okay. So there are ambulances on scene to transport those emergency patients, but you don't need an ambulance.
You know how many transports we had to the emergency room this last game, Virginia Tech game? It was probably, I don't know exactly what the attendance was, but it was higher than the first game. We had 0 transports.
I tell you where this resonates, and you can go back and probably do your research. Go back and research the Appalachian State game and see what occurred.
Okay.
You will find out that we taxed the EMS system. Now, it'd been great for you to write that story of how we treated hundreds of patients and got them all cleared out. You didn't write that, how great that was a monumental task. I was there that game.
That's another important factor too. That was blistering hot, and some of the staffing is dependent on conditions.
That's
for
exactly.
the games
That's
as well.
a very good point, and that's the thing. I say we work with ECU. They have cooling tents to make sure people are not getting too hot. In some cases, they're providing fluids such as water and Gatorade to certain people. There's a whole lot more to it than just EMS. You're making a big deal out of something that ain't no deal.
Okay.
What the deal is that really you should have been like the other news agents. Say, hey, let us come out and see what your footprint is. And say, whoa, this is like great. And you know what's even interesting is there are plans to put a better, more expanded medical facility over there at ECU. That's your story right there. That's the good news, because that's what people want to see. They want to know they can go to the game and be safe. And what they get is I get too much into Pitt. Have you ever seen an IEP from Pitt County EMS?
So if I can, I would like to clarify my question. I think there was some misunderstanding. How does staffing football games affect the rest of the GFR system and handling calls and the rest of that?
The staffing of the football game is done with people that either volunteer to work overtime, or we use low call volume EMS units.
Okay.
And that would only be one.
Okay.
So it doesn't affect. As a matter of fact, that's interesting you said that. You wrote the story as if we were causing a problem, but we actually did all of these upgrades to decrease the problem. I mean, if you go to the ED, you want to go in there as a provider, EMS provider, get the patients in there and get back out, get to wherever the next person is. That model that's over there at the stadium, it's really great. And as a matter of fact, if you do the comparison, just compare it to Auburn, Alabama, who's getting 100-some thousand people a game. Ask them how many EMS trucks they got transporting people back and forth. They're providing on-site medical care, quicker, cheaper, faster.
That's no different than NASCAR. It's no different than National Football League. It's no different than large college football games. That it's the model that the nation is moving towards in professional sports and in college sports, and even moving down into high level AA and AAA type sports.
Okay. Okay. Do you have?
All right. So moving on to the editorials half of our concerns. In Tuesday's paper, the East Carolinian ran an editorial outlining the steps we believe the city and Greenville Fire and Rescue can and should take to address the allegations at hand. So on behalf of the East Carolinians editorial board, I'd like to address my first question to Chief Griffin. I think for the most part, the biggest concern is about Tower 1 regarding ECU. And our question, and I think this might be missed, is that ECU spent money on a truck, so what we want to know, is it able to reach the top floor of green or white residence halls, because those are the high-rise buildings. And what we're asking is, can they reach in a rescue situation those 10th floors if a student would need to be extracted?
And we understand that you said that
Yeah,
the building is safe, or in a high-rise or in a fire situation there would be time for the students to get to safety or stuff like that, but we're just wondering, in a worst case scenario, would they be able to reach?
And so our request is
so
like...
if I understand your question correctly, you're talking about green and white dorm.
Yes.
And so those would be the dorms right there, we
Reed Circle.
call on the hill.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so, and those
Or in
buildings.
West End, yeah.
I'm sorry, we
Okay,
call
sorry.
it on the hill, but, and the reason why is, I'll explain that in a second. So those buildings are, over 10 stories, and, typically you're gonna have somewhere between 10 to 15 feet per story in most, high rises. And then I said 10 to 15 because it does vary. And the truck is 100 feet.
Mhm.
So I'm not trying to make you look bad. I'm just saying that truck will not reach the top of the building.
Okay, so
I
will
would,
not.
but I would ask, was that the intention when we purchased it and when ECU?
Well, I'm
we
just gonna
didn't.
go a little bit further. It's Chief Davenport used the example. A elevated platform is not designed to reach the top story of every building in your city. It would be impossible to build a elevated ladder platform, either one, to reach the top story of every building in your city. It's no way possible. And they did not provide that resource just for Tower 1. They provided that. Keep in mind that the majority of our responses for fire response to ECU is to other buildings, the medical type buildings on ECU campus. I can give you an example of over the since January of 2014, we've responded 1,051 times to residence halls. All right. So that was 27% of the responses that we had to ECU in total, which was in total over in those years has been 6,735 times on runs. All right, so 6,735 runs. Of those, 851 has been to the residence halls, with the majority of those residence halls being the top four, I'll say, is Tyler, Scott, Aycock, and Jones. We typically got to those dorms with the first arriving unit somewhere between 8.5 to 9 minutes for all those calls. Now, okay, so 2014, there were 14 structure or building type calls to the dorms. There were 10 in 15 and 8 in 16. All right, the units that responded the most, fire trucks. Engine 1 has responded 1,051 times. Engine 2 has responded 580 times. Tower 1 has responded 360 times. Engine 3, 134 times, and Engine 6, 87 times. Keep in mind, Engine 2, some of the Engine 3 times, and then the reason why I say some of the Engine 3, it has been replaced over time as an elevated platform. And Engine 6, they're all tower ladder trucks that will reach up, they're 75-foot trucks. So let's just make a quick point about the Tower 1 responses in your case. On a typical building fire type call that we respond to on ECU campus, we're going to be taking 4 fire trucks, 1 tower truck, as you're referring to as Tower 1, 2 ambulances, a battalion chief, a what we call medic 1, paramedic supervisor, a squad truck, and so with that being said, you're saying the ECU paid for the 1 tower truck.
They assisted in paying for it.
So just make a comparison that Tower 1 costs right around $1 million. Engine 2, right around 900,000. Engine 6, about the same price. So we're spending that number of trucks, but you say you pay for 1.
Helps.
Helped pay, yeah, part of it, yeah. I mean, you asked me a question that I'm not quite sure where you're going with it. It doesn't quite make sense because we're saying, and look, keep in mind, the majority of the calls we're going to ECU, they ain't fires. They're medical calls and false alarms. We run a tremendous amount of calls on the ECU campus, especially to the residence halls, for false alarms. And so
the other thing to keep in mind about a high-rise type of building, there's multiple ways of rescuing a person that would go outside of the parameters of using a ladder truck. So we train our folks in rappelling. So if need be, you go to the top of the building and rappel down to the higher floors, or you secure one of the many stairwells and you make sure it's a safe passage and you help people get down the stairwells, whichever one is not affected by the smoke and fire.
Bringing somebody out of a window on that tower truck is not the safest way to rescue somebody. And that's why I'm making a story out of something that I hope that's not where we're going. If we're going to rescue students from the building, our preferred method is going down the unaffected stairwell. We're not going up there and trying to find them to quickly put up that tower truck. Because if you think about it, those dorms you just used, we can only get to about 2 sides of most all of those. So, and if the person is not in that perfect location that you're trying to make your story on, that's just, we're giving the wrong message to the students. And that's one of the reasons why I want to go and address the SGA. I don't want to say don't listen to the East Carolinian, but do not think that tower truck is your savior. We want to first of all, work with the environmental services and all the life safety folk over at ECU to have your fire alarms tested, to make sure all your smoke alarms are working in the building, to ensure that you got clean, safe corridors to exit out of, to practice your emergency plan, to have that fire alarm, that fire exit drill drilled in every single student's head. That's how we save students. We don't save with that tower truck. That tower truck is the last ditch effort. We want them to go out the building in a unaffected stairwell, which we're going to be actually putting our first efforts towards to make sure we got the sprinkler system charged, the standpipe system charged, and make sure we're protecting them stairwells. We're not going out there. I never want to go just put that ladder truck up. Y'all telling the wrong story. I know I'm seeming impassionate about it, but please take your newspaper and give the education to the people where they need it. Don't make them stand there at the window and wait for Tower 1. It may be unrealistic that tower can even get there close enough. Please, let's use that as a tool, not as a single source of, hey, y'all got this tower truck you paid a couple $100,000 towards with the city, and that's don't. There's many more high-priced vehicles going. There's many more very well-trained people going. Please stop trying to make this story about Tower 1 being the student saving grace. I'm preaching against it, folks. And so, I mean, we're going to be taking efforts to educate the students as well as everybody else in the public. And just keep in mind, ECU don't own the only high-rise in the city. And so, you're making something that they're saying, oh, we need to really be focusing on the education piece of it. That's where we're going to save lives.
In terms of a timeline, though, for example, how long would it be before enough firefighters arrive at the scene to go and secure a stairwell to rescue individuals from a higher floor?
It would only take one engine to secure the stairwell, wouldn't it?
You're talking about what is referred to in the industry as effective firefighting force. Mm-hmm. And in most cases, we're going to have an effective firefighting force in place within about 9 minutes. Now, that is a very complex analogy. So, if you're talking about, I'm trying to call the name, Cotton Dorm, that's a very different effective firefighting force from Clement Dorm. So, an effective firefighting force varies depend on the occupancy type.
And also
keep in mind
the level of the emergency, so the amount of the building involved in the actual fire. So if you have a pot burning, that's going to require less people to deal with than if the room is on fire.
Okay.
And also keep in mind that there is life safety protection systems in these buildings. Those are the things that we're going to try to make sure we work in conjunction with, so that we don't have to have this large number of people so quickly. We want to make sure we're there controlling it very quickly. But you talked about 1710 in your article. You misquoted 1710 though, because you tried to use things like 5 people on a tower truck. But I don't think 1710 tells you anywhere in their standard or their recommendation that 5 people should be on a tower truck. What 1710 basically says the recommended number of people to control the particular hazard. So I'll give an example. On a basic hazard, 1710 recommends 14 people. If you don't have an elevated platform there, we're putting 21 people on those scenes. We're going way above that. We're bringing the people to those scenes on EMS units, on SUVs. All of our personnel, we go back and reiterate, are firefighters / EMTs or EMT paramedics. They're all certified, they're all trained, so it doesn't matter what they drive. They could drive the bicycle, they still are certified firefighters. So the tower truck coming up there, you're making this thing like, oh, they're gonna do this, that ain't how it happened.
The other thing is that the state actually is control of the fire inspections at all of the buildings because they're state-owned entities. So the fire protection services in the building, educating the students on making sure they don't prop open the doors. There's a reason why those doors close automatically. It's so that they conceal the stairwells to keep smoke and stuff getting into there, so you have a safe exit from the building. We go over there, at times, and people have propped them open because it's more convenient for them carrying stuff in and out. But that actually is limiting the fire protection services of that building. So they close for a reason, and they're lit. They have the exit sign that comes on if the power goes out to the building. All those things help to get a person to safety, which is outside of the building. And it's not going to be on a system what we're setting up outside to get them out. Those are for extenuating circumstances if they get trapped in the room with the fire and the fire is between them and the door and they're not able to get out. But all those doors in the construction of that building are fire rated doors. So if you are in a room and the door is shut and you're on a high level floor, then sometimes it may be best to protect in place. Let the person stay in there, put some wet towels underneath the door to keep smoke from coming into the room, and then signaling out the window, I'm in here, and then the IC on the scene makes the determination which is the best way to facilitate a rescue.
All that comes through education, and as I said before, that's the first thing that needs to be done. And I'll say again, you all are slanting your article towards a response that doesn't make any sense. 25 years I've been here. There's been one time that a ladder truck was used to do a rescue at ECU. You quoted one of the personnel that made that decision. That was a very poor decision. We realized after the fact that should not have been done. We put that lady's life at risk by taking those type of chances. That lady should not have came out on that ladder. There were unaffected stairwells in that building that we've realized after going back reviewing it, that was a better choice. So we've got experience one time in 25 years where very unsafe. That should have been a last ditch effort. Can you imagine? And this was Clement doing. Can you imagine going up, I don't know how far she was up, maybe 60 feet. Can you imagine her coming out that window barefooted with that ladder truck just almost close enough to the window? Can you imagine her slipping and falling? When that building was not totally involved, there was some smoke. You could have went out the unaffected stairway. Can you imagine? Please don't write your article to slant this towards Tower 1 being the first choice. I'd rather you write your article saying Chief Griffin said education is the best way to ensure your safety over at ECU. If you're in the dorm, if you're in a high rise, or whether you're inside of the gym. Education is the first clue to that.
So Well, I really appreciate meeting with you guys today directly and in person. Another major question we do have is why, now that we are going on the third week, after the initial report was published, that we have constantly been directed to Brock as the city's public information officer, when we did reach out to GFR before the publication went out, as we did with the rest of our...
That was my decision as the city's public information officer. I chose to make that decision. Rebecca, PIO is a very small part of her job. Most of her job is providing that education that Chief just spoke about.
Mhm.
And I didn't feel that she needed to dedicate the amount of time that I could see it was going to take, that would pull her away from those education duties. So that was my decision.
For instance, in October's Fire Prevention Month, I already have more than 40 events scheduled in the community, talking to kids, telling them what to do if there's a fire at their house, talking to senior adults, helping them to try not to have falls so they're not going to the emergency room, going out and doing puppet shows at the library, teaching kids about fire safety. That is, I have a dual job, and that is a very important part of what we do here. It includes everybody on staff that we utilize, and it's just...
Do not group her duties. It's not the same as like Kristen, for example, with police. It's different. It's a different position. Similar in some ways, but a different position.
And I can clarify that a little more why that is, Rob. Is that, as I said, on average, and of course we know these numbers have risen since the average, last year was 18,000 calls. 84% of those being EMS. There's not much information we can give to the public from an EMS perspective. If you look at the other percentage of the calls that we can give information out to the public, we're talking about fires, and more so structure fires is what the media would typically want. We know that number is down much lower than it's 1.82% of the 18,000. So about 200 some calls that will be fire calls, and most of them, the majority of them don't rise to the level of the news wanting some story. So that being said, I hired Rebecca knowing that we needed a little bit of PIO's work done, but the majority of education, and that is what she's doing, because there too again, we want to make sure that we train not only our personnel, but also the public to try to keep from having these events.
And let me add one more thing on that too. I do want to go back because a couple times it's been said, that Chief has mentioned, I wish you to come to us on this. You did provide questions prior to that first article. However, it was the day before the article was published, and you gave us a 5 p.m. deadline that day. We have to reply in a reasonable amount of time. If you've been working on that for months, why do you throw the questions at us the day before and give us a 5 p.m. deadline? Also, on that note, one of the other reasons that I wanted to take over communications was because, and maybe Rebecca can speak to this, she was harassed that day to try to get answers to those questions.
We treated all of our sources fairly and with the same amount of phone calls.
Rebecca, how many calls did you receive that day?
I have documented more than 18 phone calls on both my work cell phone and my work desk phone.
Matthew did establish in his phone calls, and I was in the room with him when he left those voicemails, that he would stop and cease contacting you at 7 p.m. that day that we were going to print.
Right, but 18 phone calls, there is no news agency that would ever do that.
And that was after I had to call the police to ask them to stop. He didn't just stop on his own. I called the ECU police and asked them to stop and asked them to go through Brock. But what was your name one more time?
Anna.
Anna. One of the other things is I find interesting, you're saying from editorial, do you find it interesting that we knew the things that you all would be writing on before you wrote on it and how you were going to write it? I mean, once we get all the public records, we'll trace back all the conversations, but Matthew or somebody is in conversation, and I won't say the names, but those people are basically providing, hey, they're going to write the story on this, and this. And so when the stories come very slanted to us to answer with this short deadline, we're almost like, what in the world is this? They already know what they're asking. The Pitt County EMS question, we know where that's coming from, and it makes no sense. It's like you all are not really helping yourself be a very credible paper by writing stuff that we already know is slanted. We knew before we went to the
Why
game.
has it not been addressed until now?
I think this is a
why
very
are we
good
just
point.
now in a meeting?
And I think this is a very good point that Chief makes because I mean, to sit here and say, oh, we needed to gather the answers and so forth, that would not be truthful with you. We knew where the story was going. There was nothing that was going to benefit us from sending you over email replies or just, quick answers to those questions that day. What would have been beneficial to everyone for that story would have been to set up a meeting well in advance, much like this one, to sit down and talk about all these questions. But to fire over 9 or 10 questions that were very aggressive and you could see where they were going and expect it to be answered at 5 p.m. on the day that you send it over, that's just not being fair to us. And then to publish that article without the response from Greenville Fire Rescue with that short deadline is not fair to us or your readers.
The Pitt County EMS one is a prime example. We knew about that before he asked. The only reason why he knows about Pitt County EMS is because he had friends that would ask him to, hey, go and do this. You're asking a question. If you would have came over and saw it, you would have saw you didn't even have a story. And think about this. Matthew just said it. He don't even know what Pitt County EMS consists of.
Yeah. And in addition to going back to that first article, in addition to not having comments from Greenville Fire Rescue because of the approach that was taken, also, I think it's important for the sake of credibility of your sources that you address why they are no longer with the department for those named. Now, don't get me started on the unnamed sources. That's your call as a newspaper. I personally don't agree with it. However, if you've got a named source in there that is a former employee, you owe it to the readers for the sake of credibility in the story to explain why they are no longer with the department. And I'm pretty sure, as Chief mentioned earlier, one of those folks was terminated. So as soon as you put that in your story, that person loses all credibility in what they have to say about Chief Griffin and his leadership tactics or Greenville Fire Rescue as a whole.
And what I'll say to add to that, because I noticed you tried to add this in this paper a lot, you talked a lot about retaliation. I'm surprised you didn't answer that question. I would ask that you get example of who was retaliated against, when and where, the dates, the times, and make sure that you can verify it. Because what I know is that we don't retaliate against anybody, but people such as yourself, you're able to just go out there and say poor leadership, misconduct, mismanagement, because you put up there the allegations. You are looking to write a bad story when you start your story off with allegations. Numerous people in the public have said that is the worst mess I've ever seen. Where is the information? Let's Mike Burton, for example. You contacted Mike Burton.
Yeah.
Why you didn't say anything? Because he told you from the beginning, this sounds like a witch hunt is the words he used. You contacted Mr. Moten. Why you didn't put him in there? You had a long conversation with Jeff, call him his last name. Jeff from
Robinson.
Robinson from Pitt Community College. You didn't put in anything about that. A very credible sources. You ain't put nothing in there. You know the reason why? Because they told what the truth was, and it didn't go in line with your story. I mean, when you already got your story lined up,
Great point. And this is rhetorical question here, but can you sit there and honestly tell yourself that you feel like you wrote a fair story based on that? When you talk to these people and they made comments favorably toward Greenville Fire Rescue and none of them were included, can you honestly tell yourself that you wrote a fair story?
And to answer your question, I hope Brock had answered your question. Why you didn't get the sit down till now is we've been very concerned that as Matthew Salance just shown that he was willing to write a untrue story and make allegations and then go and print and Matthew is probably a great guy. But we know the people behind this. We saw the names in there, which some of that we can't even talk about. We knew where he was going to write this story. We knew that the slant it was going. We know the same stuff. The people that you're telling, You know what they do? I guess after y'all meeting y'all have, from wherever y'all meeting at, they go out, oh yeah, they're gonna write this, hey, get ready for this, get ready for this. I know that it creates a little bit more hits on your website. You may sell a couple more papers, but it's unfair when it comes. I don't mind you making accusations about me. Honestly, I don't. I understand from the fire chief's position, a public official position, it's okay. But when you start getting people's families and getting people attacked on Facebook and all this social media the way y'all doing, you should be ashamed of yourself. You should be ashamed that these families have to go through this turmoil. You should be ashamed that people that know me that is not in the public are having to go through this. It is not right. And then the biggest thing that is not right, you're misleading your main audience. You're misleading those students to make them believe that Tower 1 is going to be their saving grace. Instead of talking about how we can go out and educate, work with Rebecca and the Life Safety Services over at the ECU. You are wrong by doing that. And if that sells papers, I'm telling you folk, that is wrong to go out there and write false information.
You made another great point, Chief. He's fine with the attacks on him from the sources and so forth. I'm speaking for you.
I really am.
However, you're only fine with it. I know I am. I've got thick skin. I can take it. You know, as a former journalist, I can tell you if that's the field you want to pursue, you better grow thick skin because you're going to constantly be criticized for your work. Now, the important point though is if you're going to have these allegations and everything against him, it goes back to the fairness. Present the other side as well, which you had. You had the other side, some, and it wasn't presented. You put it out there, negative, positive, let the reader decide for themselves. That's what journalism is all about. Too often nowadays, and this is me going off on a soapbox here, journalists are trying to influence the readers and sway the readers in a certain way. And that's not journalism. That's not true journalism.
Again, folks, I'm not beating up on y'all. I think it's very unfortunate that you got led down the path that you were going, and maybe you were okay with it. But you have been misled so many times by people who have had similar doings before. Just Google some of those people. Just take the time and Google them instead of me so much. Just put their name in and just look. And one of them you can say, whoa. But outside of that, please think about these collateral folk that has nothing to do with these stories. You all have created a mess, and it's not fair. And I've got to work as hard as I can to ensure that everybody has a equal right to work in this department. Everybody has the opportunity to have longevity. If you all just realize how difficult it is to build a diverse department in the fire service, and we got diversity in this room, you know the struggles it's been to build diverse departments in America, and for you all to go out there and do what you did. If you only knew, if you go back to that article you wrote in the editorial, if you only knew the basis of why you were writing this story. We can't tell the story, but if you only knew, it is very bad of why you were chosen to do this. It is honestly very bad. And I've told him, as much as we've talked about the newspaper, I said these folk are being misled, and I'm hurt for those folk. I really am, and I will work out the rest of my time, which it ain't gonna be 90 days, it ain't gonna be 30 days, it's gonna still be some years where I'm gonna work to ensure that we have a great department for this city, to include ECU and all its students, for men, women, for black, white, Hispanic, Jewish, Hindu, don't matter to me. I'm gonna provide a great service to every single person, and that's what I will ensure and require of all our folk working here.
I honestly believe if you guys had come to us and asked to have this kind of meeting, let's just say even a week in advance, that we would have been happy to do this. But asking someone for a 5 p.m. deadline when this is a very, it's a small part. We can't drop everything to respond to questions that seem sort of slanted to begin with, and we know you've been working on for 4 or 5 months. Like, I was waiting for you to reach out to me. I'm very surprised because I thought we had a good relationship. I worked with you numerous times. And so when he's saying I'm getting phone calls, they're working on this story, I'm like, that's so weird. I thought I had a great relationship.
A great thing on that, on Tower 1, because you was asking about it. I said to the prior city manager, Barbara Lipscomb, I said, you guys doing an article on Tower 1. I said, you do realize I told you this is a problem. And you want me to tell you what the real deal was on Tower 1? So we had an academy going on. We had a lot of people out on FMLA, which is long-term sick leave, and we had so we had those vacancies, and the academy didn't cause only vacancies. Some of the same folk they used to talk to, they were going out on FMLA to say, "Oh, I'm hurt," and they just be out for this period of time, putting that sort of pressure on the city. So basically,
What's FMLA? Clarify.
Family Medical Leave Act,
Yeah.
which is they utilize, the city's very generous the way the city does it. The city actually paid the people while they're out, let them use their sick leave, which it wasn't designed to be paid leave. But that when they do that, so they basically put a tax on the resources. So we're utilizing overtime and salaries. So what's interesting about Tower 1, we downstaffed it so that we were going to run out of overtime. Now, guess what would happen? Guess what we could have done was real easy. We could have canceled vacations. You think that would have been pretty nice? Those same people that said I was retaliating against them if I canceled vacation. But you wrote an article because I was actually doing what I thought was the best sort of balance, because I know that we have other resources go into all of these calls. We've got the capabilities. We know that Tower 1 is not the best suited for some of these locations. We've got better units. We've got the tools. And then so we made that decision. And then they have you writing the article on Tower 1, a unit that ain't even utilized that much, because they said it ain't staffed. It ain't staffed the way they're saying. There's still people around that can drive it. Like if the call come in right now and Tower 1 ain't staffed, I can go out there and drive it. I have the certification to go drive it. He has it. There's people working in the office. There's people can come from other stations. There are folk that will respond from home the same way the volunteers. Those same people you were interviewing, some of them out in the eastern part of town, they got a truck just like it. Do you think it's staffed? You didn't write that article on them. That truck ain't staffed. It's the same big old 100-foot platform. Just go out and look in Eastern Pines Fire Station. You ain't write the article on them. It ain't staffed. But there's people that will come and staff it. But make the point clear. We don't staff our boats. Do y'all realize we've had more water rescues that require the boats than we had for calls that really require Tower 1? That's why your article wasn't making a lot of sense to me.
We have 5 boats in the department.
We got trucks, we got wildland trucks that can go out, it's not staffed. We got all kinds of tools, and Ladder 1, Tower 1 is just another tool. We got very similar tools in our case, really can do a better job in some cases. So, it's 100 feet, to answer your question. Sound like a preacher. It won't reach the top of the domes in some cases. Some of the domes it will, some of it won't. Is it designed to reach the top? No. That's not what it's for.
Is there anything else you guys would like the public to know?
Yeah, we got a lot. No, I honestly, I don't want to go through the article and break it down piece by piece. I honestly want the public to know through you all's publication is that we need to make sure that we're educating not only the students but all the public first, from the whole prevention perspective. Is that's the way we save lives. Is educate people first. And we want to respond. We're going to respond in a timely manner. We're going to continue to have highly trained work staff. It's going to continue to be diverse. I know that we are in the middle of a hiring process right now, and we're looking forward to bringing those folk on and getting them trained. Will we have attrition in the future? Yeah. It's the way of the world. It's going to continue to happen, regardless of who's in the chief position. They've always had some level of attrition. Did it rise a little bit here in the last couple months? Yes, rise a little bit, but for various reasons. But we're going to continue to go out recruit and hopefully retain a very good workforce. And so, I'm sorry that it's taken this long. I'm sorry that you have been, in my opinion, misled by people who did not have the best interest of the public in general. But we should make it right, and don't try to make it right on Eric Griffin's shoulder. Make it right for those people who could not have a voice for themselves. I'm not a guy that cry, but I tell you, it hurt me to my heart to hear of the attacks that people were getting because of this stuff. It just was not right. It ain't fair. And I will put one plug in for women. It most definitely ain't fair for women. And the accusations that were made about Pitt Community College and the testing and all that, it's wrong. Because the testing been the same ever since I came. You get 2 chances to take the test at the college level. And that's based upon state rules. That ain't college rules. Green Fire Rescue ain't told the college what to do. They're governed by the state. At the state at the state EMT level, you get 3 chances to take the test. And, let me clear that up real quick. We're about to run out of video. The comment you made that this fellow Joe Graff gave you. It's interesting you use him too because he's not one of our employees, but you should look at some notes I have on that. But anyway, when people take the state EMT test, it is almost like taking not the GRE, but maybe taking that other one that's so hard for you, doctor. It is hard. At one point, there was like a 33% pass rate at the state level. It's a state test. We don't give it. A student goes in there and takes that test. Now, here's why it's so hard. They go through the class like in 5 weeks, about a 400-page book. I mean, they cram a lot of information. My comment to them is do not worry yourself to death if you don't pass this test. You're not going to lose your job. We're going to sit back and we're going to remediate you. We're going to train you. We're going to ensure that you do well. I am trying to motivate them, and y'all took that comment and tried to twist it. They got 3 chances to take the test. Now, if you were an organization, let's just say you were, I don't know, you were the fire chief. Would you want them just to rush through and take the next 2 tests without saying, hey, let's go back and read some and do some remediation? You want them to go back and take the test and fail it 3 times and they had to go back through the whole course? No, you don't want that. I don't want that. And so our city rules don't even allow you to fire somebody just because you couldn't. Well, I won't fire them because they failed the state test. And you know what's interesting about that? What's really interesting, there's people in your article who had the same opportunities that had to take them. They know that is the deal. I'm looking out for the folk. I'm trying to motivate them to say, don't put this pressure on you. I know how hard it is. Take your time. Thankfully, there were 3 people that weren't successful on the first outing. We said, slow down, take a breath, let all this kind of soak in, read your book. On the second time, they passed it. What I will tell you is, those people were not the same skin color as yours, they were mine. So it looks like we're trying to be, we're doing them a favor. No, we're not. It's been people the same skin color as yours and his and hers that didn't pass the test, and we did the identical same thing. There's nothing changed. And that dude, Joe Graff, ain't never been an employee of the city, so he don't have no earthly idea. I hope wherever he gets employment at, he doesn't bring that same level of stuff in there, because it ain't fair. It ain't fair to organizations, it ain't fair to individuals. We all should have an opportunity to be able to have long careers.
I'm good.
Thank you guys for coming. We appreciate the opportunity to sit down and explain this stuff. As you can see, this is not something we could put in an email by 5 p.m., right? I mean, there's a lot of things we covered. And so I appreciate the time. I know that you guys are students too, so thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Sure.